Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, with our ongoing series on business ethics and corporate social responsibility, today we are going to talk on development of ethics and decision making. And for the discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Dr. Namita Rajput. Dr. Namita Rajput is Principal in Sri Aurobindo Evening College, University of Delhi. Dr. Rajput has immense experience and she is the author of numerous books. Friends, let's take advantages from her experiences and let's try to understand today's topic in detail, that is development of ethics and decision making. So let's welcome our guest, Dr. Namita Rajput. Hello ma'am, welcome to the lecture.
Good morning friends. Today we will be talking on the meaning of business ethics, the features of ethics, how it is developed, what are the basic decision making process involved in business decision making, and the basic underlying values behind it. So starting with the concept of the ethics. Ethics is all about a rule of morality. It talks about the means, it talks about the ends, it talks about the rightness and the wrongness of the conduct of an individual, whether the act is right or wrong. So ethics deals with the laws of morality and the rules of the conduct. It determines the rightness and the wrongness of the action. It determines the ultimate aim that man should admire and the ideals that he wishes to seek in the life. So in this backdrop, let me give you the concept of the meaning of ethics. Ethics is the science of judging, especially the human ends and the relationship of means to those ends. In some ways, it is also the art of controlling the means so that they will serve specifically the human end merit. There is no defined set of rules. Let me tell you, ethics is all about the morality, and morality has got no significant definite meaning of what is right and what is wrong. It is basically judgmental, and you derive the concept of ethics from so many sources like religion, laws, etc. So basically, when you are born in a family, in the journey of the life, you are being taught by your parents, by your peer group, that this is right and this is wrong. So under that boundaries, you try and learn about the rightness and the wrongness of the action. So it is not a definite definition because everyone has a journey of its own, everyone lives its own life, everyone has its own set of parameters and the paradigms and the frontiers within which you live. So we cannot have a definite set rule of the ethics, and definitely what is the rightness and the wrongness of the act. So what is a virtue and what is a vice, and what determines the moral application of a person. Now starting with the concept of the features of ethics, which we have taken a slight of definitions in the previous lectures, but today we'll be taking in depth a complete insight of the features of ethics. The nature of ethics would be clear from the following features. Ethics contains a set of principles of the personal and the professional conduct. Ethics, existing norms and the judgments may contain the valuable insights, but ethics tests them in terms of the ultimate norms. So what does it convey and what does it mean? When you talk about ethics, ethics talks about the conduct, the judgment of an individual, and the judgment centers around, and the nucleus of the ethics centers around the rightness and the wrongness of an action. According to some people, the concept is right, and according to some people, the concept is wrong. So it is all judgmental in nature because everyone has its own parameters. In terms of the focus sometimes is individual in nature, and sometimes we talk about the universality of the morality that is taking care of the benefits to the society at large. So if you are taking care of yourself, that means you are having the individualistic approach of the ethics, whereas if you talk about having the benefits to the society at large, you talk about the universality of the action. So these are the features of the ethics. Now ethics does not rest on the feeling of the approval or the disapproval, but a very careful examination of the reality around us. It may, for example, be unpleasant to fire the employee, but ethics may demand sometimes the principles, not the feelings, and gives us the ethics. Now let me give you a concept of the ethics in this regard. When you talk about the ethics, you do not, convey about the approval and the disapproval of an action. Suppose I'm taking an action and I'm into a corporate life, and I'm on a managerial position, and if I shunt a person out or a person is fired, this act of mine Could be ethical, could be unethical. It is ethical from my part because that individual was actually showing some dissonance in the organization, was showing some distrust in the organization. He was not, genuine with his work. So he was shunted out. So according to me, the part of firing an individual or an employee was ethical, whereas if you talk from the other's perspective, it is not a true act, because shunting out somebody from his job is unethical, because that person would be losing the bread and butter and will definitely be in a deep pain because the earning source is completely gone. So we do not need the approval in case of the firing of an individual, because sometimes it is unpleasant for someone, but it may be pleasant for someone else. So the ethics does not rest on the feeling and the approval and the disapproval of an individual, but definitely if you have a very close examination and try to root out the facts, then of course you will be coming on to a right judgment that this individual was shunted out because of these reasons. So before you come on to a judgment of an act about the rightness and the wrongness or the judgmental part of an act, then definitely you have to be very clear about you have to find out the reasons behind it. You have to find out what were the forces which forced an individual to do such an action. And of course, I'll give you an example of it. It may be, for example, the unpleasant to fire an employee, but ethical may demand just like this. So principles, not the feelings, gives us the ethics. Now, there are some other, aspects which are connected with the concept of the ethics. So let me have a look on this. The ethics is not legal, though it does not permit the violation of laws. It is a guide to law insofar as it highlights its shortcomings, and what constitutes the ethical behavior in one society may be unethical in the other. For example, the artificial birth control is mandatory in China but restricted in Catholic Christian societies. So, it is circumstantial in nature, because having a birth control and, putting a seal to the population may be unethical in some countries, whereas it is ethical in some countries, because there is a population explosion in China. So they implemented this part of the birth control in China. So this part on the Chinese government was ethical, whereas if you put this control on the Catholic Christian societies, this is unethical in nature. So the same act is considered as ethical in some aspect and may be considered as unethical in the other. So taking forward my presentation, so let me give you another feature of what ethics is all about. Ethics is involved in all the human activities, including the business. There is a need for a science of ethics in every human endeavor. So now I'll be giving you some insights on how there is a development of the ethics, how it is took place, and how the evolution took place in the ethical aspects. So study of ethics has developed as a science of moral reasoning in the following phases. Starting with the Greek ethics, it is associated and advocated that ethics deals with the duties of a person as a moral citizen of a nation, followed by a good or an ethical man is one who performs his duties as a good citizen. The famous advocates on this view are Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. They were the key pillars when you talk about the famous advocates of ethics. They are well known for their work in the field of ethics. Now, there's a concept called medieval ethics. That is how it started, and we are now centering around the development part of the ethics. So this is the period when Christianity spread in Europe. It spread the thoughts that ethics is not just a part of the politics, as said by the Greek philosophy. It does not deal with the duties of a person, rather it deals with increasing the inner aspect of one's morality. Now, coming on to, after taking care of the part of the Greek ethics which was traditional in nature, then followed by the medieval ethics, now we are coming on to the most important part, that is the modern ethics. What is modern ethics is a big question mark, because again the definition is under a question mark and under the ethical lens by so many people in this regard. So this era of ethics believes in performing the actions whose results would bring a good to us and to others, because this is the moral principle behind the ethics, that do good and no harm. So this is the concept behind the conceptual aspect of the modern ethics. That is, it centers around your conduct. The consequent of that conduct is that you're giving the benefits to the people at large and not giving any harm to anyone for that matter. So it deals with determining the rightness of an act. It tells us about what individuals or institutions ought to be. The moral theories that advocate the modern ethics deals with the two components. Now, what are those two components? Starting with the first component, that is the theory of value and a theory of good. As the name suggests, it decides about what is good or valuable, though it does not make this explicit. It focuses on the properties that we want to realize our actions, and these properties may be in compliance with the law of nature, the human freedom, the social solidarity, and the combination of one or more of them. Now coming on to the B aspect, because we took that there are two aspects of this theory. The first was the theory of value or a theory of good, and now we are coming on to the theory of right. These concepts should be crystal clear in the mind of the students, that what is right and what is good. So again, I want to give you a recap of what is good. What is good is decided by the valuable action of an individual. It focuses on the properties that we want to realize in our actions. So this is good or bad. Now coming on to the second part, that is the theory of right. What is the theory of right? It does not tell about the properties are valuable, but tells us about what individuals or institutions should do by responding to the valuable properties. Then of course it tantamounts to a theory of what is right. Now based on the above discussion which we have done about the rightness and the goodness of an action, there are two kinds of moral theories which have been derived. Consequentialist or theological theories, this is one aspect. Non-consequential theological is deontological theories. So we would be now discussing on the two aspects, that is the consequential aspect and the non-consequential aspect. When the center or the code of conduct is centering around the consequences, and basically you are measuring the consequences, that if the consequences are good, you say that your conduct or an action is good, is consequential theory. The other name given to the consequential theory is a theological theory. Now coming on to the other aspect, and in contrary to the consequential or the theological theories, we have the deontological theory or non-consequential theory. So in the non-consequential theory, the center is not on the consequences, but the means which have been adopted to achieve those goals. So there is a dichotomy between the two, there is a difference between the two. So straight away the consequential theory talks about the consequences, and the non-consequential theories talks about the means which you adopt to achieve those consequences. Now coming on to the development of the ethics, that is the first aspect which we are centering here, is the consequential or the theological theories. The theological ethics deals with the consequentialism. And of course, this is a very, very important, theory. Sometimes people, they stand on the crossroads. Sometimes there is a deadlock in the decision making. Sometimes you feel lost that whether this particular act is good or bad. So these two theories will break the ice. It will, come on to help you in coming on to a right decision of whether the consequences are good or bad. So, taking it forward. So when you talk about the consequentialist or the theological theories, it is associated with the utilitarianism, ethical egoism, and goal-based approaches to the consequentialism. These theories emphasize on the goals and the ends in determining the moral quality of the conduct or the character. It refers to the rightness of an action or the moral values of the character. So far we have discussed in the concept of the development of the ethics that we are centering around the two parts of the theory. The first is the theological or the consequential theory, and the second part is a non-consequential theory. When you talk about the consequentialism, here the center is all about the conduct of an individual. that how is he doing, what is he doing, and of course the ethical egoism and the utilitarianism. So these theories emphasize on the goal and the ends in determining the moral quality or the conduct or the character. It refers to the rightness of an action, and basically you are just measuring the ends, you are measuring the goals, you are measuring the objectives. We are not at all taking care of the means to an ends, but ends to a mean. So in simple words, we can say that when you talk about the consequentialist theory, the center is all about the ends, not the means. Whatever means you adopt is immaterial, but whatever are the consequences is the most material and most important thing in the theological theories or the consequential theory of ethics. It uses the ends and the goals to justify the virtues and the actions. When you want to say that the consequences are good, you always see that the actions have the virtues and the consequences are good. The theological theories hold the rightness and the wrongness of an action is always determined by its tendency to produce certain consequences which are intrinsically good or bad. They assert that right actions are those that have been the best consequences. They give priorities to good over right. So you must understand as a student of ethics the concept and the differential aspect of the good and the right. Here we are talking about the good consequences. We are not talking about the right means. So in one line I can say that consequentialist theory is all about the ends and not the means. You justify the ends and you do not justify the means to achieve those ends. According to them, there are some actions that maximizes the good and are right decisions. Any action which is consequently good for n number of people or the people at large, we say that the actions are good. What is good is independent of what is right. You must understand this concept that we are here talking about the goodness of an action. We are not talking about the rightness of the means to achieve those ends. The theological theories provide different views on what is good. According to egoistic theories, good is good of a person who is acting. According to universalist theories, good is a good of all those who are affected by an action. Now coming on to utilitarianism. Utilitarianism or universalist is the best known theological theories. According to Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill and Henry Sidgwick were the famous utilitarians who asserted that the actions should be judged on the basis of the amount of pleasure they produce on all those who are affected by those actions. They should bring good to all and not just those who perform those actions. Now coming on to the vital and the pertinent features of the theological theories. Number one, it gives priority of what is good over what is right. Good is the purpose or the goal of the human actions, and the human actions should bring the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. All the actions that contribute to good or moral actions, an action that brings happiness to the greatest number of the people is a right action. If by taking a particular action you are able to bring the happiness to the society, the happiness to the public at large, the happiness to the number of people at large, we say that yes, the action which has been taken or the conduct which has been done by an individual is right. So here we are focusing on the rightness, the goodness of an action rather than the rightness of an action. If it is bringing, just have a clear demarcation that here we are judging the act as good only when it is giving the happiness to the right number of people, then you justify that that particular action is right. The results or the consequences determine the rightness or the wrongness of the moral actions. So one of the important theological theory is that of the consequentialism. Consequentialism meaning, what is the meaning behind it? It is the theory of ethics or the theological theories that defines the rightness or the wrongness of an action by the goodness and the badness of its results. So results here we are talking about the consequences. It states that end result of all the actions should be good and ends should justify the means. So here when you talk about the differentiation between the ends and the means, here we are always measuring the actions. We are measuring the ends. We are measuring the objectives. So when you are measuring the objectives, ends, and the overall the conduct of an individual, we ultimately see that whether it is bringing goodness and benefits and happiness to the people at large. Then we justify that the action is right. So we justify a particular action as good only when it brings the justification of happiness to the people at large. Now coming on to the development of the ethics. If the result of an action is good or right for individuals' long-term self-interest and also for the greatest number of the people in the society, the action should be considered as right. The right actions are those that good effect on our health, reputation, economic and social well-being and environment, and also about the well-being of the others. The consequentialism thus focuses on the best consequences, the best results, the best ends and the objectives which have been achieved at the end for all the concerned. It holds that when an action is right or wrong, it's only depending upon its consequences. So the judgment is all about the consequences, not all about the means which you adopt. So this theory becomes a very popular theory in the 18th century, and to some extent when you talk about these theories, they hold good today also. Now, what are the forms of consequentialism theory? Because we are now doing this theories of ethics, the theological consequentialism and non-consequential deontology in detail. So till now we have discussed the consequentialist theory, wherein the focus was on the consequences and we judged the rightness and the wrongness of action just on the basis of the consequences. And if the consequences are good, we judge the particular action as right and wrong. So the goodness and the badness of an act depends upon the results or the consequences which is eventually giving to the society at large. Now coming on to the forms of consequentialism, again this is very, very important for you to understand. The first theory which we'll talk about today, when you talk about the consequentialist theory, is the theory of ethical egoism. How does the name suggest and what does it mean? In this form of consequentialism, the desired end is the long-term self-interest of the individual. It claims that while making a moral decision, one should consider the long-term self-interest of the decision making. Now, there are certain important issues which I would like to highlight here, that here we are talking about the forms of consequentialism. And the forms of consequentialism, in first we talked about the theory of the ethical egoism. Just try and understand what is ethical egoism. The ethical egoism is all about individualistic interest. If a person is having a long-term individualistic interest, we say that yes, this theory is all about self-benefit, self-centered, and if it is consequentially and eventually giving benefits to an individual only, not to the public at large. So we justify a particular act only when it is giving or the outcomes are giving the benefits to one individual only, not to public at large. So when this is the focus, we call it as ethical egoism. The short-term self-interest, when you talk about of an individual, should be sacrificed on the sake of the long-term self-interest. Again, here you must understand the focus one is on self. Number two, the focus is on long-term self-interest. No, it's not that you're just taking a particular conduct or an action and it is eventually giving you the benefits over a very, very small period. Then this is not justified. The ethical egoism is all about having a self-interest, only giving the benefits to an individual, plus it is giving a self long-term interest to an individual only. So if the long-term self-interest can be achieved by performing an action, the action should be performed. So the Thomas Hobbes and Ayn Rand are associated with this kind of a thinking. So overall we have seen today the concept of ethics, the meaning of ethics, how the ethics has been evolved, what were the development ethics, that is we first started with the Greek ethics, with the medieval ethics, with the modern ethics, and we talked about the theories of the development of the ethics, wherein the first theory was the theory of value or a theory of good, and the theory of right. So there are the two parameters relating to it, the theory of rightness and the theory of goodness. Then we started with the concept of applying these benefits and applying these types on the development of the ethics. We said that there are two types. One is consequentialism or teleological theories, and the second was non-consequentialism and deontological theories. We started in detail the concept of what is consequentialism. So consequentialism is all about the consequences, and of course it is giving to the benefits of, we judge the action only if it is, the consequences are good and it is giving the benefits to the public at large. Then we started with the types of theological theories, in which we started with the concept of the overall ethical egoism. So ethical egoism is all about when you are having the center on the individual, and of course for a longer period. So with this note, I give a break off for this part of the lecture. See you soon.
With this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving this productive session. And friends, we believe that your feedbacks are important, which we continuously and constantly get. So if you want to have more knowledge on the topic, you are requested to be with us as we are back after a short break. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that in our previous session we discussed on the development of ethics. In this session, concerning to the development of ethics, we are going to talk on the two most important theories, and for the discussion on the theories we have with us in our studios Dr. Namita Rajput. Dr. Namita Rajput is a dynamic and a prolific professor, and we believe that in this session too you are going to gather maximum knowledge through her. So let's welcome our guest, Dr. Namita Rajput. Hello ma'am, welcome to the session.
So in the previous part, we discussed the types of the theories, in which we talked about the consequentialism and the teleological theories, and non-consequential and deontological theories. So we discussed in detail the forms of the consequentialist theories, and we discussed the theory of ethical egoism. In this form of consequentialism, the desired end is the long-term self-interest of an individual. It claims that while making a moral decision, one should consider the long-term self-interest of the decision making. Then of course there is a short-term self-interest also, and if any should be sacrificed for the sake of the long-term self-interest. If long-term self-interest can be achieved by performing an action, the action should be performed. And we talked about that Mr. Hobbes and Ayn Rand are associated with this kind of a thinking. Now coming on to the development of ethics, that how the ethics were developed. The ethical egoist maintains that an action is right in as much as it maximizes one's own good and wrong insofar as it detracts from one's own self-interest. As with the other consequentialist, the ethical egoist believes that the consequences alone make an action right or wrong, good and bad. What distinguishes the egoist from the other consequentialist theory is that the egoist measures only the consequences to themselves, not to the public at large, and their own self-interest, not to anyone else. Then of course an action, when you talk about the other aspect of life, an action is morally right if the consequences of that action are more favorable than unfavorable to the agent who is performing the action. So here the center is all around and is all focused on an individual, not to the public at large. Now coming on to the other aspect, first we discussed the ethical egoism, wherein the whole focus, the nucleus and the center was the individual interest, whether short term or long term. So you are just bothering about seeing the consequences of an individual. But yes, there is the other side of the coin also, wherein the consequences are watched to the public at large. And when you see this consequences of public at large, we call it as utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a type of a consequentialist theory wherein the focus is on the public at large, not to the consequences and the outcomes of one individual only. So starting with this and under this backdrop, let me give you the conceptual framework of what utilitarianism is all about. In this form of consequentialism, the desired end is not the long-term self-interest of an individual, but here the focus digresses from individual to public at large, from individual to society at large, from individual to n number of people who are benefit out of that conduct of an individual. So here the greatest happiness is giving a greatest number to the people at large. Any action that brings the greatest happiness to the greatest number of people is a desirable action and should be performed. The advocates of this action here is talking about the Bentham and John Stuart Mill, whereas the previous theory, the advocates of the theory was Thomas Hobbes and Rand are associated with this kind of a thinking. So there are a lot of people who have worked for the development of the theories. When you talk about the utilitarianism or you talk about the ethical egoism, the ethical egoism was basically propounded and supported by the Hobbes and Rand, whereas when you talk about the utilitarianism, they were the Jerome Bentham and John Stuart Mill. These school of thought supported the consequentialism, or which is called as the utilitarianism theory of ethics. Now, on the interesting part of today's lecture, we have already discussed on the consequentialism. Now we will be discussing on non-consequentialist theory. The other name which has been associated with this is called as the deontological theories of ethics. When you talk about the deontological theories of ethics, the focus is not on the consequences. The focus here is on the means to achieve those consequences. So here, whether your means and the measures to achieve those consequences are right, we judge your action as right. If the measures and the means adopted to achieve those actions are wrong, we call it as wrong. So the deontological theory is a theory of ethics which has been advocated by many philosophers like Kant, Rawls and John Rawls. They were the people who were having a great work on the deontological theory of ethics. Rawls, Kant and John Rawls were the persons who did a great work in this particular aspect of deontological theories of ethics. This theory considers the action of right or wrong regardless of the consequences. So just keep this in mind, that we are not focusing here on the consequences. We are focusing on the means to an ends, not ends to the means. So here, whatever are the consequences is immaterial to judge a particular action as right or wrong, whereas the rightness and the wrongness of an action is judged by what? It is judged by the means or the measures to adopt a particular circumstances. Actions that have the moral values are right, whether they are good or bad. If telling lies is morally wrong, it remains wrong even if it brings happiness to some people. So there was a dichotomy and there was a confusion on this particular action, that if a particular person is lying on a particular circumstances, we say that lying is a vice, not a virtue. So if you're lying, and of course nobody can justify your lying, even if your lying is bringing the benefits to the public at large. So here the whole focus on the rightness and the wrongness of an action is basically on the measures, the means to adopt those consequences, not the ends or the consequences. So taking it forward, actions are thus right or wrong depending upon whether they are morally right or wrong, irrespective of their consequences. What is right has priority over what is good. Deontology is derived from a Greek word deon, which means an obligation or a duty. It stresses on what is obligatory and what ought to be, and whether or not it is good, so or bad. Now, speaking truth may not bring happiness and the goodness to a large number of people, but one must speak truth because it is the moral duty of an individual to speak truth. So, speaking lies is always a vice, not a virtue. Similarly, speaking truth is again a virtue, not a vice. So here we will keep on focusing on these virtues, not the vices, which we have been taught right from our childhood, right from our upbringing as a young man or a young woman, because we are taught in those boundaries. We are taught right from the beginning that this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong. So that rightness and the wrongness of an action is based on the virtues, not the vices. And of course, we are here not bothered about, and it is the consequences which are immaterial to judge whether a particular action is right or wrong. Now, what is the act of deontology? It claims that obligations and the moral duties cannot be generalized. It does not follow the rules of performing a specific actions. Actions are performed according to circumstances. For example, in this situation, I must not break my promise is an obligation that represents the act of deontology. What is the rule of deontology? It claims that obligations and the moral duties can be generalized. Moral duties or the values consist of general rules and not the actions according to circumstances. For example, we must always keep our promises is an obligation that represents the rule of deontology. Once you promise anybody that yes, I will do it, you must do it because it is a virtue. To promise and to perform a promise is a virtue which the Indian society has given a lesson all about. If somebody breaks the promises, it is a vice. And of course, that act of breaking the promise can never be justified. So these values, these actions, these duties are very, very fundamental. And of course, we are not depending on the consequences anymore. We are depending upon the means. So here, the rightness and the wrongness of an action is all about the means, not the ends. Whereas, if you talk about the consequentialist or the theological theories, the goodness and the badness of an action, the rightness and the wrongness of an action is justified by the consequences, not the means. So it justifies the ends to the means, whereas the deontology justifies the means to an end. These were the the points of differences between the two types of theories, which is the main basis of the ethical theories of rightness of good and the rightness of bad. The actions are performed according to rules and not circumstances, according to Kant, Rawls and Ross. They are the prominent deontologist thinkers. They have their own way of thinking. Their way of thinking is non-consequentialism. They're not bothered that whether the conduct of an individual, the work of an individual, the particular act of an individual is bringing happiness or not is immaterial for them. But yes, whatever they do, whatever they feel, the means should justify the ends. So with these words, I move on to the Kant theory. The Kant says that the results and the consequences should not guide our actions. What guides us? It is the means which guides us to move forward in a particular direction rather than the consequences. Our actions should follow the moral law. If breaking a promise or telling a lie is wrong, the action is immoral. And of course, according to Ross, we should all follow our moral duties regardless of the consequences. Now, one moral principle can be sacrificed only when another moral principle, John Rawls says that the fairness is a priori over goodness. So this is a very important conceptual framework which has been given by Rawls. That is, one moral principle can be sacrificed only for another moral principle. According to John Rawls says that the fairness is prior to goodness. That is, you should be fair enough to take any action rather than the goodness of an action. The fairness of society's rule is more important than the consequences of their rules. Now coming on to the pertinent part of the lecture, that is, what is the difference between the two, deontology and consequentialism. The differences between the two are as follows. Number one, just have a look on the slide. The first is the rightness and the wrongness of an action is determined by its morality and not its consequences, followed by the theological theories, that is, consequential based. The rightness and the wrongness of an action is determined by its consequences. So this is the first and the foremost difference between the two, that the rightness and the wrongness of an action is judged when you talk about the deontology on the not on the consequences but on the means to adopt those consequences, whereas the theological theories, the center, the nucleus and the main focus is on the consequences, not on the means. So this is the priori difference between the two theories of ethics, that is the theory of deontology and the theory of consequentialism. Coming on to the prominent thinkers. The prominent thinkers, when you talk about the deontology, is Kant, Ross and Rawls. Whereas if you see the other part of it, that is the theological theorist, the prominent one are Bentham and J.S. Mill. They give priority, when you talk about the deontological theory, they give priority to right over good. Whereas if you see the other side of it, that is the theological theory, they give priority to good over right. The right action may not necessarily maximize the good. The right action is what maximizes the good in the theological theories. Right actions may or may not bring happiness to the large number of people. The right actions bring happiness to individuals performing the actions, that is the egoist theory. Happiness to the greatest number of people, that is the utilitarianism. When you talk about the deontological theories, they are the theories of ethics that deal with the duty and obligation, whereas if you talk about the theological theories, they are the theories of ethics which deals with the goals and end results of the action. Now coming on to the very basic part, so that we have the recap of what business ethics is all about. We have discussed how the ethics has been derived, what were the theories behind it, the different school of thoughts. Some focuses on the consequences, some focuses on the means. So we have discussed that in detail. So under that backdrop, let us have a conceptual framework of what business ethics is all about. If you apply all the ethical theories into the business and which help you in decision making, it gives you a direction to what is the right action and what is the wrong action, we call it as a business ethics. So taking it forward and in detail, let us give a particular definition relating to the business ethics. The business ethics deals with the determination of rules and behavior of a business enterprises. It determines the rightness and the wrongness of an action of a businessman. It is the duty of what ethical, permissible and what is positively virtuous in regard to the business activity. Management ethics is a concept which is closely associated to the concept of the social responsiveness of a firm. It is defined as a discipline of dealing with what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong, and of course about the moral duties and the obligations. It is a set of moral principles that governs the action of individual or a group. So basically when you talk about the business ethics, it is all the culmination of the wisdom of the school of thoughts about the actions, about the theories which you have learnt and applying that in the business. So when you do this, we call it as a business ethics. It is a set of the moral principles which has been derived and which governs the actions of individual or a group. Business ethics is the application of ethical principles to business relationships and the activities. Business ethics governs the way the business runs and carries its operations. It determines the standard of behavior that guides the managers in their work. What are the features of the business ethics? It determines the issues that business houses face in operating their business activities. It draws the distinction of what is right and wrong, fair and unfair, just and unjust. It is an important component of a corporate social responsibility that demands the business houses to engage in behavior that are socially responsible. It demands that corporate houses should not go only for the profit making, they should be having good corporate governance and the corporate citizens also. It demands that the corporate houses should obey the law, and the legal obedience is the ethical contest that ensures the long-term survival and prosperity of a business house. So what are we discussing here? We are discussing the implementation of the ethical aspects into the business, and we focused on the key business activities which ought to be adopted by a businessman. One, they should do their business in a very ethical form, in a socially responsible manner. Anyway, any action which has been taken by any business house or a corporate house should not eventually result into any kind of harm to the business at large. And of course, any kind of compliance, any kind of legal obedience is a key to a long-term survival of the business. If the business is having all kind of compliance, when you talk about the outside stakeholders, we call that this business house is a social responsible house and should be given a chance to thrive, to penetrate into the market wherein you can grow, you can expand your roots and you can earn the profits, a reasonable ethical profits, etc. To earn profits is not a, it's not a bad thing, because if you want to have a sustainable business, you must earn to a reasonable extent, but not at the cost of the society or damaging the society at large. I'll give an example that if the corporate houses are doing any activity which is harming the environment, which is not good for the environment, those business houses should be logged. They should be uprooted in all circumstances, because we do not have any planet B, we just have planet A. So just taking care of planet A, that is Earth, is a prime responsibility, is a joint responsibility, is a universal responsibility of all corporate houses at large. So we have just one point, that is taking care of the environment. If you are having and showing your greed, that is, if you are not having any compliance with the environment impact analysis, which almost all the corporate houses do, this is not a good thing for the businessmen. And if with this kind of contention, with this kind of culmination of the bad things into the corporate business houses, it is not at all advisable for that business corporate house to grow. So the government should take immediate compliance in this regard to close such business houses which are not having any kind of a vision to take care of the society, and they're just penetrating and growing into the market because of the malpractices, because of the wrong practices, and not being socially, ethically responsible form of the business. So with these words I move forward. That is the conceptual framework of the business ethics. It defines not just what the business managers do, that is the descriptive ethics, but also why should they be doing it, that is the normative ethics. So what you do is a positive ethics, the descriptive ethics, and when you talk and implement those things, that is what ought to be is a normative ethics. It is broader than law, and of course there may be business activities that are ethical but illegal and unethical and unjust. The study of business ethics has been one of the most prime importance since the times immemorial, but lately the subject of the business ethics is gaining wide popularity. It has become a subject of interest, the academic curriculum of most of the business schools of today. When you talk about the business houses of today, the business schools of today, wherein the MBA is being taught, so all these things are culminated together and are imbibed into the minds of the young people. That is, they learn as good managers, they learn as the upcoming managers, that it is the prime responsibility of the managers to grow their business, to expand their business in a very ethical way. So we have nowadays a very important post of the ethical managers in the modern and contemporary business houses and the globally responsible citizens. So the ethical business activities, how do you calculate them and how do you term that? According to most of the host of the ethical activities, it constitutes the managerial actions. A study conducted by Barry Pawson and the Warren Skimmett, it highlights the following ethical activities that are observed by the business managers. The foremost goal of the managers is to make their organizations most effective. And how they can do it? They can do it by doing a profit maximization under the ethical lens. So this is a very simple statement, but it is very difficult to implement because the greed overrules everything. It overpowers everything. Because if you're getting money because of the greedy activities of the business houses, you will not take care about the society. But yes, when you start growing, when you start having a social vision wherein you want to start a business, you must always have this contention in mind, and your convictions should be very, very strong that yes, the prime motive of a business corporate house is to grow, is to increase the profit, but with the controlled environment, but with the ethical lens. What is unethical should be immediately stopped, should be immediately saying no to it. Otherwise, if you are continuing with your unethical business activities, your business will become Titanic. You understand what Titanic means? That like a Titanic ship was drowned, similarly your business will also be drowned because you are continuously doing the unethical activities, growing your business in an unethical way, increasing your profits in a very unethical way. So if you want to penetrate the market, grow into the market, be ethical, show ethical, do ethical. So the profit maximization and the stockholder interest and the managers of the central goal of the managers, it should be at the center. And of course, when you talk about the ethical activities to be adopted and implemented in the corporate houses of today, it should emanate from the top. Because whatever good things come, it comes from top. Whatever bad things come, they also come from the top. So as a responsible citizen, as a responsible manager, you should emanate good values, good, the virtues right from the top of the management, because you become the ideal in that case. Whatever you will do, the people will follow. So if you want to have the good followers, if you want to be a good manager, if you want to have the ethical perspective around you, you must be ethical in your ways. You must do implementation of the ethical activities in your own way. Attending to the customer was seen as very, very important. So you must feel that today we have consumer sovereignty. That is, whatever we do, whatever we feel, we should satisfy the customers to the largest possible extent. Otherwise, the customer will not allow you to thrive, to grow in the business. Integrity was the consequences as most of the rated managers of all the levels today. So integrity, ethical activities and other vital cases should be implemented to a substantial extent to the corporate business houses if we want to thrive and have the best aspect in life. So the pressure to conform to the business standards was seen, so you must adhere to the business standards, and of course the ethical dilemmas must be solved. Ethical dilemmas are considered as the biggest problem of today because you do not understand what is right and what is wrong. So you're standing on the crossroads, so you must apply the ethical decision-making process to eventually come on to a success road, eventually come on to a good road, which only leads to the success. And the most managers seek the advice of the others in handling the good business ethical dilemmas. Thank you so much.
With this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving us this productive session. And friends, we believe that you should write to us at info.cec@nic.in if you have any feedbacks or any questions. We'll try to give answers to your questions when next time Dr. Namita Rajput visits our studio. The lecture is going to be uploaded on YouTube soon. So keep watching us and keep writing us. We are taking your leave now with the promise that, yes, we of course are going to meet and would be discussing on new topic. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again.